lytter til Københavns Universitets seneste forsøg på at forklare verden. Sammen undersøger vi, hvad vi ved, hvad vi ikke ved, og hvad vi diskuterer endnu. Velkommen til Verden forsøgt forklaret.
Hello, everyone, and welcome from me as well. As Mette said, today we're here to talk about something that may sound a little technical, artificial intelligence, but we're going to keep it grounded and human because this is really a conversation about public service and trust and community. And as she mentioned, our guest is Professor Serge Belongie. Welcome, Serge. He leads the Pioneer Center for AI, and he co-founded and is chief scientist at CAISA, a very new center focused on how AI impacts society. But most importantly, he's someone who wants to make AI work for people and not just institutions and corporations. So let's dive in. And also, I want to say, keep your questions ready because we'll open up for questions from you in the audience at the very end. But we'll begin with a very basic but not so basic question. Because when people hear the word AI, they think of something maybe very distant or very mystic or very technical. So, Serge, could you help us start by explaining what AI is and maybe as importantly, what it is not?
Sure. So I should say AI is used as an umbrella term, so it's not really used that much within academic disciplines. You're much more likely to find terms like computer vision, natural language processing, brain-computer interfaces. So that's where you find research happening. If you put that all together with the various startup companies, big tech products and so on, and then you sprinkle a bit of hocus pocus on it, then you get AI. So it's a little mix of science fiction, technology, math, statistics, and so on. But I'm approaching it from the academic perspective, so I tend to use those terms like computer vision and so on.
But have you, in academia, accepted the term AI now?
I gave up.
All using it.
I gave in.
We're all using it, okay.
Yeah.
You gave up.
Yeah.
So your journey into AI started as, I understand it, was a quest to make your phone or your computer recognize birds while bird watching. Can you talk about when you kind of realized that AI could be something more than just tech, the potential of it?
Sure. And I'll venture into some stereotypes of computer scientists here, and I'm totally guilty of this, so I'll just say what happened. So this started with some colleagues and I from Caltech and UC San Diego just saying, wouldn't it be cool to take a picture of a bird and find out the species? It wasn't driven by a desire to advance biodiversity or climate change, or just, wouldn't it be cool? Take a picture. So this was like 2007, 2008. And at the time, the state of the art in image-related AI was not good at all. We decided the best way to get started is just crawl the internet, collect some pictures, in our case, 200 species of birds, and try out the state of the art on that challenge. You know, American robin or crested warbler, whatever, just see how well does it work. And it was abysmal. I mean, it was so bad, but we thought this is an important problem that we want to study, and someday AI techniques will catch up and people will realize this is interesting, it's worth working on. So I felt really motivated because that problem looks, I would say, for those of you that are bird watchers, I mean, the birds are very nice to look at. They're colorful, they have interesting patterns. I thought computers should be able to do this. And then, so here's the first place where the computer scientists stepped into their sort of Asperger stereotype. So I thought, okay, I know people at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's like the top place in the world to study birds. I'm going to show them what we're doing, and I bet they're going to love it. So we worked through some contacts and made a trip out to Ithaca, New York, and met with this team. And we realized that the reception was very cold, very prickly. And in so many words, they told us, your data set stinks. the set of birds that you pick, the species are just weird. and it's filled with mistakes. There's no knowledge about the geotag, like the location or the habitat of the birds. Just so many things wrong. And I was just crushed. I was thinking they were going to love this thing. What I didn't know is that I was part of this long sequence of technology and AI people that were knocking on their door saying, look at this cool stuff we have. We want your data. We want your community to use this. And they were just tired. It wasn't personal. They weren't mad at me specifically. Years later, they hired me. So, things went well. But they were very blunt, and they just said, if you're willing to start from scratch, we will work with you, but you just have to throw away everything that you did so far. And that, I'm skipping a lot of steps, but that happened. And then I realized, whereas all my other colleagues who were working on object recognition for household objects, for cars, planes, etc., everything they did meant you had to pay annotators to take the pictures, label them, draw bounding boxes. And this seems like distant past now, but back then, if you wanted to use AI, you had to collect tons and tons of images and get them labeled meticulously, like with the car, the make and model of the car, and so on. What we found when we were working with birds is if you connect with the community, and you really have this dialogue and you understand what they're interested in and you work together, you get something that in some sense is free. You're not paying them with money, but you get this incredible exchange of ideas. You get something that's way beyond what you'd get if you were paying crowd workers to label stuff. Now, in exchange, a lot of the researchers from our team over the next 6 years spent a lot of time and effort embedding themselves in that community. Originally birds, then later butterflies, and then mushrooms, and all these communities. And we got to know the personalities that were behind these communities. And they weren't anti-AI. They were just saying all these people that we talked to before, they were just extractive. They were trying to take what we have and make some mutant product that no one asked for.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking that actually identifying a problem to solve instead of just saying, wow, this is cool. And then just moving along a little bit from the birds, because that's so interesting, into finding the problems to solve. How did you come to the point where you started working or thinking that AI could actually solve or serve people and society in new ways?
I think there was a pivotal moment that preceded moving to Denmark, but it was working with that community at the Cornell Lab of O, and then the iNaturalist community, which is at the California Academy of Sciences. This jumps ahead a bit, but that's what brought me to visit Denmark to begin with, because they were all sending their data to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF, which is in Copenhagen. And so just for technical, research reasons, I was visiting Denmark, and I had this vague sense, somehow this biodiversity community thing is important here. But this is all before Trump. This is before, I wasn't thinking of moving or anything. This was just a research opportunity. So during that time of working, in this case with iNaturalist, we reached this trust moment with the community. They understood this is not AI first. This is community. This is people. This is dialogue. And then we made one more tactical mistake. So we were about to release a version of iNaturalist that had AI in it. And the prototype that we made had a button on it that said identify species. It seemed to make sense. You see a butterfly, you take a picture, you see it on the screen, and you hit this button, identify species. And wow, did we realize that was a mistake, because our contacts at iNaturalist said, you have to change that. You do not identify the species. We identify the species. Change the button. Make it say, suggest species, and then show visually similar, seen nearby. And then the user can scroll and they can confirm for themselves. And then their community takes those images and they figure out what to do with it. So it's yet another level. And I just said, I get it. Like at first I felt bad. We blew it again. And I just thought, what if such communities existed in just society? You know, what if there were a functional government somewhere in the world, or like a municipality that's somehow functioning? Again, Denmark seemed like a mythical country at this point, but it seemed like whatever we were discovering there should be applicable in lots of other areas. And then, you know, fast forward, suddenly the opportunity to move here happens, and now I want to bring that kind of approach to everything.
And why go to Denmark to work with AI? Because that is kind of interesting. What kind of reactions did you get to the move in kind of New York, Cornell University, where you came from?
So in the beginning, because it was to visit GBIF and it was so focused on biodiversity, it didn't raise eyebrows at all, just completely normal. And there was also a small Google office in Copenhagen. That was the point of connection. It was a public-private partnership to set up this system for biodiversity research. And during those visits, I got to know many faculty at different universities in Denmark. And it just led to me being on thesis defense committees or just starting chats with people about research. And I should mention my wife is Danish. Okay, so that's
living in the US.
But what I would point out, she had been in the US for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I would also say there are plenty of Americans that are married to Europeans. It doesn't mean you move to Europe. At least it didn't used to, right? So I think that certainly opened the door, but it was through those discussions, and then COVID happened, and New York City was not a fun place to be during COVID. It was, you know, on the bright side, I used to have an hour-long commute, and suddenly I had all that extra time. And it was during that time I started talking with professors in Denmark about what would become the Pioneer Center for AI. I had no idea I would be involved in it at all. It's just I enjoyed the conversations with these researchers, and it was always framed like, if I were to have a research center focused on AI, this is what it would look like. Here are the divisions. This is the way the campuses would work together. And after about a year of those off and on discussions, they finally said, just in theory, you know, if we were to, you know, invite you for a job interview, would you want to try that? And that, you know, one thing led to another.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit about what this Pioneer Center does. It does a lot of things, but we're going to dive into one particular project today. And talking about kind of the basics of it, or not the basics, the motivation for actually building this product. In Denmark, we have a very digitalized society, and we often praise how digitalized our public service is. It's very easy. You just use MitID, very easy, right? But more and more people are also saying, I can't get the help I need. I can't get hold of a person. The chatbot doesn't understand me. If there's a chatbot to talk to, what is happening here?
Yeah, so you're very right. I think it's known around the world that Denmark is one of the most digitalized countries. I'm really impressed in the years that I've been here, how many things are online, how efficient those processes are. I know if you've been living here, you probably don't sing those praises because it's not, you're just used to it. But to me, it's very impressive. And also the MitID concept is very impressive. In general, that is a single sign-on functionality. Very few countries have that. The idea that you get into the system and it's a trusted network. So the good and the bad of that digitalization is that it puts Denmark in arguably perfect conditions to try out generative AI. But as you were saying, when you look at the way that generative AI technology is marketed, they say this will solve all your problems. You don't need workers at City Hall. You don't need customer service workers because the AI will fix all of it. And as I started to hear that narrative taking shape, that same radar went off as what I had experienced with the biodiversity community. I wondered, have they talked to people in City Hall? Have they talked to people who do customer service? Do they actually know what's happening? So yeah, being digitalized sets up the conditions so that you can train these systems, but it is far from determined whether it can actually deliver the way that Silicon Valley is saying that it can.
So actually, you haven't really integrated it into the system in a way that makes it fully usable for people to use it. We all know it when we've kind of talked to a chatbot, and you only have like a few possible ways of communicating with this chatbot, and you can't really ask the question that you want to ask. It's not really possible. Try all of these different options, but you're kind of locked into a system.
Yeah, so the first wave of chatbots, let's say around 2010 through 2015 or so, they were famously bad. And they used something called templating. So they weren't so much chatbots as, imagine you go to the website and this little window pops up at the bottom. How can I help you? It's usually some little cartoon character. And my reaction when I see that is, oh.
Yeah, go away, go away, go away.
Representative, person, whatever. No, I won't do that. Please pick one of these categories. And then, customer service, billing, whatever. So it's not so much a chatbot as just like an interface to frequently asked questions and so on. Now, in my case, if I'm there, it's usually because I couldn't find the answer I needed. And anyone who's actually in customer service knows it's corner cases all the way down. It's really wishful thinking that this chatbot can handle it. But in that first wave, I think a lot of the companies doing this realized this isn't working. Like the pie chart of what people punch in is mostly representative, human, quit, and so on. So the chatbot wave subsided for a while. Generative AI took off, ChatGPT, Claude, et cetera, started to emerge. And then the first few companies and local governments started to try it. And it went off script in very weird ways. Because as you may know, a lot of these systems are what's called pre-trained. So they're built on models that are trained on kind of the whole internet. So even if they try to tune them to things like building permits, landlord-tenant disputes, things like that, there's a lot of World War II knowledge in the, there's a lot of strange things. And with the right tricks, you can pull that information out. So these stories started to emerge of like a rental car company offering to give the car to the customer just by accident. The chatbot says this, and then that, is that legally binding? So what happens in this case? Well, they just turn the screws on the chatbot so that even though it has this capability to be very fluent and human-like in its dialogue, it sends you back to that old style of chatbot. And that's what I'm seeing. To the extent that these chatbots are out, the companies and the municipalities are saying it's too risky. We have to tighten it, lock it down, and really only let it do these certain things, it's a shame, but they just were moving too fast.
But still, there's a lot of information that we are finding it more and more difficult to actually find from the right sources, you could say. Because you can go to ChatGPT or whatever chatbot and ask your questions, and then it might be right, it might not be. Yeah. And a lot of people actually go to different kind of Facebook groups, or they go to Reddit threads, or something, for menopause questions, for parenting advice, even for kind of finding your disability services. People go there instead of to, what you could say, the right sources. Yeah. And this leads me over to your project that we're going to talk about. It's a vision for an AI that kind of works for citizens rather than institutions to get them kind of the knowledge that they need. It's called VoresAI, VoresAI. And can you explain this idea kind of so that we understand it?
Yeah, so you set the stage quite nicely for it in the sense that I think it's kind of a familiar trajectory that we have in circa 2025. There's some problem that you have. Let's say that you have surgery coming up and you want to go to Sundhed.dk to find out what you can eat, or is a certain physical activity okay, or something like that. And that information is probably there on the page. Or maybe there's a dispute with a summer house neighbor that's annoyed with some structure, something like that. That information is out there. It's sitting digitalized and ready for you. Now, The pattern that often happens, as you described, is that you might start by going to that authority's website, the company or the authority's website, and you jump through their hoops. So you might do their you look for the magnifying glass, you search. The chirpy chatbot pops up, you try to use that. And in many cases, you don't get what you need. Then in my case, the next thing I do is I go to Google. And I feel a little guilty doing it, and I also think it's a little bit doomed because Denmark's a small country and Danish language resources are a very small piece of the pie in terms of the global, like the functionality of Google and chatbots and stuff is somewhat limited for the small languages. But I go to Google and then sometimes I find what I need on the authority site through Google, which is a little weird. But in many cases, I end up on Reddit, or I'll go to Facebook and I'll find a Facebook group. Or there might be a WhatsApp chat group that somebody recommends. And it's strange to go through that process. And not just that, as you mentioned an example, like say there's an article on menopause in a big newspaper. And then right there at the end, the last paragraph will say, to continue the discussion, or if you're looking for resources, here's a Facebook group where you can talk about this with the community. It's not like we feel bad recommending that this is the place. No, that's just a thing that's done. So, and it would be nice to think that somehow this benefit propagates back to the website, like somehow that change, but it doesn't because you're leaving the ecosystem, right? If you were at the hospital website and you leave, there's no benefit there. So I thought, and this is together with Rebecca from CAISA, as we started brainstorming this, she just looked at me and said, what if that changed? What if we're thinking moonshots, and because I was describing it in a little bit of a desperate way, saying, how could we ever break the chokehold that Facebook and Meta and all these Reddit and so on, the chokehold that they have on Danish society, could that ever be broken? And she doesn't know either, but why not? Why not dream of a situation where those kinds of conversations are actually happening in, as you described it, the right place? It's not a lack of technology. It's not that we're missing the capability to do it. If you think about the kinds of discussions that are happening on all these Facebook groups, parents with kids who refuse to go to school, parents of kids who want to play professional soccer or whatever, all these different groups, there's some pretty personal things being discussed on there. And you know that companies like Facebook have incredible AI functionality, yet none of it finds its way to those groups. They're somehow working with Stone Age forum technology. There are these volunteers, basically, who are running those groups, but are they even people? Are there bots on there? How is it being monetized for advertising? Why isn't there any function? I mean, there's duplicate questions sent to these things constantly. And sometimes people post anonymously, but again, like Rebecca said, what if that could change? And that was the genesis of VoresAI.
And that was kind of the motivation to create VoresAI. Yeah. But what does it actually do? Yeah. How can we become part of this? How can our communities and our agency become part of it?
Okay, so there's a technical part where I would say I have some authority to speak about, and then there's a part that's just a dream, and then you'll find me very naive.
We'll talk about both, I think.
Yeah, that's where the naive immigrant part comes out, but bear with me. So the technical part is that when I talk about that journey through customer service, I understand the pressure that the companies and the organizations are under. They can't let these chatbots run their mouths. It's too risky to let them just say whatever they want. Now, in the case of the surgery that you have coming up, if you're logged in through your MIT-day, you should feel somewhat comfortable sharing personal information. But it's very likely that any chatbot in a situation like that is going to say, please don't provide or we can't respond to specific cases, or just really having to be careful and just point you to documentation. And as a customer or as a patient, I think you have a right to say, you know what, I think AI should do more for me, right? So there's this tricky thing. That's the MIT AE part. And I do want to participate in making the best chatbot possible at all of the different companies and public authorities. But when the journey normally takes you out of that ecosystem, that's where I want VoresAI to kick in, which is to say, as a parent or as a new grad from law school or whatever, when you log in to this future MIT AE thing, you will have the option to join a number of collectives. And the collectives you can think of in the Nordic tradition, in the Danish tradition of collective action and cooperative movement, these collectives represent interest groups. They're groups of people that care about certain topics that I would argue right now are just naturally organizing around Facebook groups and things like that. So now we're deep into the aspirational territory, because if you build it, will they come? I don't know. But the dream is that you identify these different interest groups, you organize them into these so-called data collectives, and tempt people away from the Facebook groups. And you explain, if they say, well, what's in it for us? I've been using Facebook forever. No one really likes it, but we've got the account and we're kind of locked in. I would say, well, this is different, because if you're doing the same thing through VoresAI, you're signed in through MIT. It means that you can have secure access to your private data in vaults. You can have actual human beings who are running those collectives. This, you have your CPR, they're going to have a CVR for their collective. But
if that might be, so just to understand how I interact with this, I log in with MIT. I have a surgery coming up. I need to know something about fasting, something about training afterwards. I interact with a chatbot that's built for this system, and I can access information not only by the healthcare system with the hospital, but also other patient groups who have added their information?
Yeah.
How?
So let's say that the default is just MIT AE, so you haven't opted into any data collectives. You just have a somewhat generic chatbot. And then hopefully, as CAISA progresses, one by one, different organizations opt in. So you've got this sort of universal chatbot, but it doesn't have any color to it yet, because you haven't joined any of the collectives. And you'd quickly find out it's somewhat limited in terms of what it can answer. So where this comes up is that you join some. So it could be athletes, or whatever the topic is. Now what you have is this, you've got your own private store of data. You can upload PDFs, you can upload data. You've got your own history for anything that's linked to your MIT ID. It could be your transit history, it could be medical history, whatever. And you can have, in the system we've designed, fine-grained control over what information is used when interacting with the chatbot. Same kind of thing when going back and forth to these collectives. So the reason I call them data collectives is because even though the AI part is what captures everybody's attention, that's the rocket science, the AI is nothing without the data. The real value comes from curating authoritative data sources. That's the part that endures throughout time. So the data collectives, which today loosely would be the admins of the Facebook group, their main function is to curate public, let's say public-ish resources and histories of dialogue and questions and so forth. And this is an important distinction from the MIT AE part. The VoresAI is able to cultivate a chatbot that can run its mouth, that is getting a little bit off script because it does not have legal authority. Facebook groups don't have legal authority. You see it all the time. Some investor group, tax advice, whatever. They're always saying, this is not legally binding or whatever. they don't have the same restrictions that the authorities themselves have. And it's so clear from the journeys that I described before that people have that need to have those conversations. But again, that's where I'm saying, why are those conversations happening outside the Danish ecosystem?
So basically, it's connecting all of my most personal data that I trust our system with MitID, with all of this information available basically on what I need right now. It's personalized as well. And the way I understand it is that the reason you thought this was really interesting to do in Denmark, or possible to do in Denmark, is because of foreninger, volunteer work.
Yeah.
We have it already.
Andelsbevægelsen.
And Margrethe Vestager, I told you about Andelsbevægelsen.
That's right.
You told me that. So why is it, can this only be done in countries like this, do you think?
I mean, this is really a knock on wood kind of thing, because like I said, if you build it, will they come? And again, it's actually Rebecca that dared me to move ahead with this plan, because I just said
Rebecca Adler-Nissen, who's leading CAISA, the center I talked about before.
You know, it just seemed like as my kids were making friends in school and I got to know the parents, everyone's on Facebook. These conversations would start in Aula and they would jump to Facebook or WhatsApp as fast as possible. And I thought, wait, but there's like a Danish infrastructure. Oh, come on. You know, and then the birthday party happens, boom, all the pictures shared on Google Facebook groups, shared on Google or Facebook groups, Google Photos, whatever.
But is this actually a social media as well then? Because when you say birthday pictures for kids' birthdays, I'm not connecting to MitID in my mind. That would be mostly when you talk to me like a student or in my work or as a patient, I understand it. But you think of it as a social interaction as well.
VoresAI?
Yeah.
I would say, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think in one form or another, unless the European Commission just shuts down Meta completely, like it's possible something will happen where it's not a choice that we have, like something like that could happen. But barring that, it's very likely that Meta-owned properties will persist in some form, and chances are birthday photos, guinea pig owner groups, they're going to be there on Facebook. So I think there's a natural self-organization that would occur that when it starts to enter the sphere of private things, family-related things, education-type things, that's where I feel somewhat protective. And that's the kind of thing I want to move into VoresAI. I don't want to say it's all or nothing.
But do you think, this is a moonshot project, you said that a few times, thinking that we're shooting for the moon, right? It might not work, we hope, but if it works, do you see this as kind of, could Denmark be a front runner in these kind of systems? Could this work elsewhere?
100%. The analogies I use are things like Nordic cuisine, Nordic film. There are a number of these things where Denmark has had impact really way out of proportion to its size. And when you look at the way cuisine had its impact with Klaus Meyer, for example, with film, with the famous directors, it's not that the rest of the world replicates it, but it has impact. And they see something about locally sourced ingredients, lack of artifice. It's a genuine process. There's certain values that are there. And this wasn't completely organic. I mean, these things emerged through concerted efforts to say, this is something that this community is doing. You can write down a thesis and say, this is what we're going to do in these areas. I want to do this in AI. I want to make Nordic AI. Now, I would say there are just a handful of countries where that will work in its purest form. We could still, and I should say, when you create that Nordic AI ecosystem, it can give rise to 1,000 startups. Because for every single one of these collectives, there are these opportunities to create new businesses that tap into that system, as long as they're compliant with the privacy and things like that. So I would say, to go back to your question, chances are most other regions of the world don't have the level of trust in institutions for this to work. So I could just say Nordic AI is super local, it will never have impact. No, I think it is a brand, and I can absolutely imagine it impacting the design of AI in other places in the world. But if you really want the real deal, you would have to come here.
I was thinking when I thought of VoresAI, because it sounds amazing not having to go to Google and all of these places to actually search for information, as you said, on a particular website. But also, this is the basics of the problem is, as I see it, that we can't find the information that we need by talking to a person. People have kind of disappeared from borgerservice, from all of these places where you just want to call someone up and say, hey, I have this problem, please just help me with this. I need a connection.
Yeah.
So could it be that you're kind of replacing one digital flawed system with another, where you have to communicate with a chatbot as well?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on this. And I think a lot of the ideas I have for AI involve hiring more people rather than fewer. So, and one phenomenon I think we've experienced is that there are you can go to one communa to do something, like renew a passport, and get a certain interaction, and you go to a different one and you get a different interaction. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I actually think when I talk about these data collectives, they're not fully automated. They will have a chair, an IT person, a treasurer. These are real entities. And in what I'm envisioning, in order for them to register to be, let's say, approved for the VoresAI system, they need to have a relationship with the actual businesses or municipalities that they represent.
So one example could be, just to understand.
Let's say that it's in it's a summer house neighborhood, and the collective has to do with, let's say, the kids. It's an extended family, and the older generation owns the summer home. And there's certain challenges that are involved in that, just purely theoretically. So that data collective takes shape and builds a relationship with the building agency, with the communa. Like, these are real human beings, because the people that are running the data collective are the ones curating the information, the digitalized data, getting help on answering questions. It's something that has human vetting all the time. And that means that because it's not just AI, there are certain things in there that actually depend on the opinion of certain people around that collective. And it means you're not going to get the same answer from every collective. I see that as a feature, not a bug.
So the people you really have to get a hold on are the volunteers, the frivillige of Forenings Danmark, who's putting all their energy into the football club or the whatever community, and has this, they have to put their energy into VoresAI, put all of the relevant data and documentation into it, start the conversations, and then get help from the chatbot in communicating it.
Yeah, I think so.
One thing that we talk about a lot when we talk about AI in relation to other countries, and specifically to the States and China, is kind of the race and the pace of AI being so high. We have to be really fast to get our solutions ahead. Otherwise, someone else will come along, some other solution. We are too slow. That is what we're told all the time. And what you're talking about here seems kind of bureaucratic, right?
Yeah.
And it takes time to build systems like this.
Yeah.
Does that matter, do you think? The time aspect of this?
Yeah, the bureaucracy and the human, I mean, humans, we are a pain. You know, it's when you look at the problems with Aula and the parents and the kids, it's not the software that's the problem, it's the parents. We're awful. That's what makes it a problem. But what I want to say is that should be our problem. There's VoresAI and there's VoresProblema, right? Like, we won't solve the problems with AI. But the question is, where will the problems be solved? So there are a lot of things where people will be in disagreements with neighbors, or they're frustrated that their kid's being bullied and the school is not paying attention to it. I'm saying, don't look to AI for those answers. You're still looking to people for answers, and the AI is helping you navigate it. That's it. Now, if other countries or regions are saying, no, we're actually going to lay off all these people because the AI is going to be able to solve it, and it's going to be fair, it's going to be the future of government because it has perfect answers, I'm thinking, what science fiction have you been reading? And I'm reading the first half of the book and not seeing how that ended up, right? So I am admitting what I'm describing is high touch, full of annoying and wonderful people. The AI is taking a back seat. It's helping you navigate and pointing you to documents, but it's stopping short of just saying, here's the answer on your building permit. The computer has spoken.
But will this system be in competition with the chatbots that we're using now? What I'm asking is, do we have to move really fast before we are locked into whatever chatbot some American tech giant is offering us right now?
So let's say, for sake of argument, we're talking about Apple or Facebook. But Apple's a good one to talk about because many of us have an Apple iPhone in our pocket, and a lot of our personal information passes through it. So you could imagine that there is an arms race of a sort. So when it comes to the single sign-on concept, we were saying earlier that MitID is a single sign-on for an entire country. That is incredible. That's the kind of thing that every big tech company wants. And when you go to a lot of websites, you see these options to log in. You could do it by email, Facebook, Twitter, all these choices, and they're really pushing you to do that. And in the dreams of those companies, if you would just do everything through Google or everything through Meta, it would simplify their lives hugely. It does not necessarily make things better for you. So in that setting, the single sign-on, the MitID that Denmark has, is a massive opportunity. So, and now I've forgotten what the beginning was.
No, I was just thinking, if these, I'm not sure where they are heading and how much they will be able to answer and how much they hallucinate, because that's always kind of we get new information on that all the time. But will they be a real competition for the solution that you're suggesting? Will they be able to personalize this kind of information for us the way that VoresAI
So this may sound corny, but it depends on us. Because if they're putting out these solutions, for example, that involve sensitive medical data, and they prompt you to upload all of your medical records, and you do, then all the projects I'm proposing are doomed. It's over. Because Apple and Google and so on already have all your data. And if you just get to that point where you're not just uploading your data, but you're taking huge conversation transcripts from Aula about bullying without the consent of these other parents and just putting it into your chatbot, it's game over. I mean, and that's the thing I'm worried about. But I'm just saying that I think those companies want that, but we should push against it.
Thank you so much, Serge Belongie, for the conversation, first off. Let's give him a hand.
I was listening very carefully to what you said. I think it's very interesting, and thanks for choosing Denmark to do this experiment, if you can put it like that. What I didn't get out of your speech was when.
When?
Yeah, when is it possible to do the VoresAI?
Yeah, so
what time frame are we looking at?
Yeah,
Is it
so we're
10
looking.
years,
Yeah, it's something that will roll out very slowly. So I think this summer, the rough plan we have in mind is to have 4 different authorities or municipalities or companies from across Denmark that are participating, and some, let's say, fewer than 10 data collectives. So just a very small scale experiment. And then we just have to see how it goes. But it's just starting small like that. Yeah.
Is what you're talking about here, is that actually public service AI? That's one question. And who's responsible? Because I think the problems with Facebook is that they don't feel they're responsible.
Yeah.
So in your system, who's responsible if something goes wrong?
Yeah. So the MIT AE part, the default chatbot you get when you log in with your MIT Day is a public service. So that's something I can't speak with authority on that. That's more a Ministry of Digitalization, but that is a subsidized product that benefits all of society. VoresAI, the platform, is also a public service, but that's just a forum for discussions. The actual collectives, the fees, the membership fees they charge the organization, they are their own things. Now, in terms of the accountability and responsibility, I imagine it's very different for the two. For MIT AE, the level, it needs to be the single source of truth. Whatever you get from that's trained on the digitized information from the company or authorities needs to be correct. And that's why I'm saying it's kind of ratcheted down. It's very rigid kind of chatbot interaction. That's where a lot of attorneys have to get involved and say, this is the real deal, okay? VoresAI, the conversations that will happen there, that's a whole different ballgame. Everything that comes out of those is at the discretion of the collective and always prefaced with, this is not official information. So I would say that for example, the Facebook groups, the WhatsApp chat groups and so on, they set the bar very low, right? So it may sound disappointing that those collectives don't have more authority, but that's where I think the free-ranging discussions have to happen. And then you can go back to the authorities a little bit more focused and get what you need.
So who actually owns this, and how do we avoid the Statens Serum Institute, all this very, very Statens Serum Institute case that all of these conversations are suddenly sold to Saudi Arabia? I think that would not be super good. And then secondly, how are you collaborating with startups that are already in that space of building an alternative to Facebook?
Okay, so the first part touches on cybersecurity, and I'm not an expert there. And I'm very impressed with what I'm seeing with the cybersecurity people in the Ministry of Digitalization, Digital Task Force. I'm just entering it with good faith that those systems will perform the way they should. But I don't want to be naive about it. What you're describing is certainly a huge concern in terms of the theft. The first part was more about the ownership. And I think, again, there's a bifurcation there. The MIT AE part, that is completely owned by the authorities. Your own information is your own, just as it is within the MIT EDE infrastructure. The conversations that happen within the collectives, it's going to be different for all of them. So joining a collective, there are going to be terms. But in order to be a collective, you have to be compliant with the VoresAI system. And that means they need to be audited regularly and have transparent budgets and things like that. The second part with the startups, I would say that what I envision is the base level of VoresAI discussion forum support and the LLMs, the large language models and so forth, that will be provided there will be very rudimentary. They'll be okay. It could be like a Mistral model, 7 billion parameter, whatever, that's just basic. But I imagine that all of the startup companies that are out there doing really innovative, interesting things, they can get in on this ecosystem. Any collective, let's say that there's a collective that costs a lot to join, just, they're kind of exclusive. They could have a really cool chatbot that has a massive context length for all these legal documents and things like that. And that's going to require startup companies and so forth to get involved with that. But they will still have to be compliant with this public service. So I think, again, it's very different answers for those two parts, the MIT AE and the VoresAI part.
So would it be the idea that OurAI or MIT AI would be like the first point of contact with the public sector in Denmark? And my second question would be, what language model would it be built on? Would it be like a Danish language model?
Yeah, so the first question is something I don't know with the first question, because lurking behind the scenes is this possibility of a lot of people losing their jobs. And that I have no control over that. As a research project within CAISA, we are asked, how is this going to work? If a chatbot is the first point of contact for citizens, what would that look like? And it's our moral responsibility to point out the things where it can do great and the things where it will do horrible. So I think in the same way that maybe starting 20 years ago, the web and then later the mobile web became the first point of contact, I think that is eventually going to happen. But I don't know what the timeline for that will be. The second question, I just need a quick reminder. Danish. Oh, Danish. Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that, because there's some good news here that for many years, you only heard about certain really big famous models. So there was the GPT, the first few GPTs from OpenAI, Claude, eventually the French startup, Mistral. But then the Chinese model came out, DeepSeek, and shocked everyone because they did it on very low-cost hardware, relatively speaking. And meanwhile, a lot of Danish language models are being trained as we speak. And it appears that that core functionality of the LLM is something of a commodity. And I would say, anecdotally, it is now known that if you want to get good scientific information related to health, you get better results by asking the question in Danish or Swedish or Norwegian, even if you're sitting in California, right? Now, it's not because there's some magic in the translation of the languages. It's just the models that are trained on scientific information in those languages has a lower amount of misinformation. So it isn't just, I mean, the term language is overloaded. There's the Danish language, but there's also the language model. So I would say most of what I'm describing would benefit hugely from having an actual homegrown Danish language model. I don't know that it will be ready right away. But as I pointed out with these collectives, they're not AI collectives, they're data collectives. That's the part that persists. These models shift like sand. They're changing all the time, but the data is the important part.
So thank you so much for your questions. That was really amazing to hear from you. And I think that was all the time we had. I am personally looking so much forward to continuing this conversation. I hope we have another chance to hear how it's going. But thank you so much for today, and let's give a huge hand to Serge Belongie.
Du har lyttet til Verden forsøgt forklaret. En udsendelse fra Københavns Universitet, udviklet med støtte fra Novo Nordisk Fonden.